Now, before I jump into the actual scriptures for today, I want to tell you a brief story. It's an account of something that happened to me over 20 years ago. This is my casting photo taken in 1999. But I had already developed quite a portfolio for a number of years before that as a background actor in Hollywood. I had been cast a number of movies, Mars Attacks with Jack Nicholson, Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Black Sheep with Chris Farley, and a number of other movies, TV shows, and commercials. In fact, I was a regular on this show, Boy Meets World, and if you were a child or adolescent in the 90s, or if you had children in the 90s, odds are you probably know this show. It's pretty ongoing and had a pretty long run. In fact, I was such a regular on there, interestingly. This is where my future wife had first seen me. And when Stephanie and I had first started dating and getting to know each other, I told her about my experiences, and she said, "Wait a minute, that was you? I know you. I used to watch you." And it's just interesting how the Lord works things, that about 15 years later, she would marry that hunk that she infatuated over. And I had a lot of good experiences. Bunch of free food, smorgasbords of on the set with bagels and steak and you name it. Meeting celebrities and seeing behind-the-scenes productions of things. And it was great for a while. And then I was cast in this movie, Apt Pupil. This is a film adaptation of a Stephen King novel. And I don't know the details of it. I've never actually seen the movie. In fact, it's pretty common that when you're cast, you don't know what the production is about. It's just a job you get paid, and you put it on your resume. Well, the scene called for me to be in a gym locker room with a bunch of other adolescent boys. And we were asked to basically disrobe to our underwear. And normally it wouldn't be so bad if I was in a normal school, but I felt a bit uncomfortable knowing that I'd be filmed. So knowing that it was a bit awkward, understandably, there was even apparently one other adolescent boy who was asked to completely disrobe. And his parents, being on the set, were understandably upset and complained. Production stopped, we were sent home, and they actually filed a lawsuit against the production company for it. So without going into details about that, just the point that it was a wake-up call for me. I started to reflect on a number of other prior instances when there were inappropriate advances made. There were uncomfortable situations that I otherwise should have recognized. But I was either naively ignorant or consciously rationalized that it was okay. So little by little, it creeped up to the point that it got to this. After that point, it wasn't the same after that. So keeping that in mind, I would like to jump into today's scripture. Today's parsha is entitled Vayera, and it's taken from the book of Genesis, chapters 18 through 22. And I'm going to be addressing the portion of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But before I jump into that, just a little bit of a background in chapter 13 to give some context. In verse 10, Lot looked about him and saw how well watered was the whole plain of the Jordan, all of it. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, all the way to Zoar, like the garden of the Lord. A lot of commentaries suggest this is comparing it to the Garden of Eden. Interesting that Sodom and Gomorrah at one point was compared to the Garden of Eden. Not in all aspects, obviously, but just the fact that there was a comparison is important here. So addressing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, we jump to where Abraham is pleading with God to save the city. Chapter 18, verse 23, we pick up. Abraham came forward and said, "Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly?" And the Lord answered,
"If I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake."
What if the 50 should lack 5? Will you destroy the whole city for want of the 5?
I will not destroy if I find 45 there.
What if 40 should be found there?
I will not do it for the sake of the 40.
Let not the Lord be angry if I go on. What if 30 should be found there?
I will not do it if I find 30 there.
I venture again to speak to my Lord. What if 20 should be found there?
I will not destroy for the sake of the 20.
Okay. Let not the Lord be angry if I speak but this last time. What if 10 should be found there?
I will not destroy for the sake of the 10.
Now, for those of you celebrating Halloween in a few days, keep this in mind. The men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man, gathered about the house. And they shouted to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may be intimate with them." And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. You want to talk about some persistent trick-or-treaters? Seriously, what's going on here? In chapter 13, Sodom and Gomorrah were compared to the Garden of Eden. 5 chapters later, it's become so evil that God has to destroy it. So it's reasonable to believe that at one point, they weren't as evil as they were at this point. But they incrementally started to accept what was going on around them. They rationalized the evil that was happening, little by little. Well, it's not so bad. Well, maybe that's not so bad. Well, maybe it might be bad, but we're progressing. We're getting with the times. Until it reached this boiling point. How many of you know who this guy is? Elvis, 1965, appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And Ed Sullivan had directed his photographers to film only from the waist up because it was too controversial that he would be shaking his leg. Fast forward a few decades later, this guy, Marilyn Manson, isn't even a shock to the rock and roll industry anymore. How many of you know this movie? Musical, West Side Story. At the time, it was considered a bit controversial because they were too violent. There were gangs fighting with knives while they were singing songs. Fast forward a few decades later, Pulp Fiction is one of the most violent, blasphemous, grotesque movies out there. And there's far worse. How about this one? Even says up there, vintage classics, Some Like It Hot, Tony Lee Curtis, Jack Lemmon, Marilyn Monroe. 2 gentlemen dressed in drag to join an all-female band. Fast forward a few decades later, Brokeback Mountain, an infamous movie that had many accolades, won awards, celebrated 2 homosexual cowboys in their relationship. Judgment is coming, folks. Are you ready? Are we ready as a society? Are we ready at Ben David as a congregation? Or are we rationalizing the incremental changes and evils that are creeping up on us and excusing them? Direct you to the Brit Chadashah in Luke, chapter 17, verse 28 through 30. And the world will be as it was in the days of Lot. People went about their daily business, eating and drinking, buying and selling, farming and building, until the morning Lot left Sodom. Then fire and burning sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. Yes, it will be business as usual, right up to the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Are we going about our days as business as usual and putting blinders on? Being so forgiving of sin, we ignore it. Just a thought. Don't confuse God's long suffering for infinite patience. Shabbat shalom.